This episode contains content regarding drugs, alcohol, addiction, and sobriety. If this isn't the episode you need to hear, click away right now. I love you, and recovery is possible. And with that, hello, and welcome back to the BFA Baby podcast. You may notice the somber tone and more serious energy, or that I'm looking at my phone more, and that's all because this episode is on a more serious topic. I've been itching to make an episode about addiction, substance abuse, and obsession in the arts since the first season of this podcast. It's something that I've been scared to talk about, something that's close to my heart, close in my mind, and something that I have taken a lot of care in scripting. Like I said, you may notice me looking at my phone more often today, and that's because I've fully scripted this episode out. I usually just have bullet point notes or I roll completely off the cuff, but I wanted every word in this episode to be said eloquently and perfectly. This is a serious topic after all, and with last week's episode about the tortured artist archetype, there were mentions of drugs and alcohol and obsession being part of these stories, both fictional and those in real life. The rampant use and abuse of substances in our field of work isn't something that I have been immune to or sheltered from, and it's been glaringly obvious for years now. As I enter my 20s and choose to lead a completely sober life, I really am passionate about substance abuse, addiction, and education prevention in my field, as it is so prominent and simultaneously so hidden. We'll talk about my choice of sobriety towards the end of this episode, but I wanted to start with some research and first-person accounts of substance abuse in the performing arts. It was important to me for this episode to lift up the stories and voices of the recovered, as those stories can help encourage recovery in others. To quote directly from the American Addiction Center, quote, "A 2015 report released by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration describes the rates of substance use and abuse within several different industry categories, including arts and entertainment." Unquote. That's us. To continue, quote, "A large problem that plagues the arts industry, as reported by the study, is excessive alcohol use. Over 1/10 of the industry population reports to having consumed alcohol in excess within any given month. Illicit drug use statistics slightly outpace the alcohol, with 13.7% of the population reporting use within a month's time. Over the course of a year, between both illicit drug use and heavy alcohol consumption, total substance use disorders reported at 12.9% for the entire industry, which makes arts and entertainment the third highest of all industries included within the study," end quote. So the article goes on to further say that there is no clear-cut scientific correlation between artists and addiction, as over 50% of addiction and addict tendencies can be attributed to genetics, and there is science to back that up. I thought that I would speculate, not as a scientist, but as someone who lives and breathes the arts and entertainment industry, why we as artists might be so drawn to substances, drugs, alcohol, and the use and subsequent abuse of those. The first thing on the top of my brain when I was writing this, and I think the most obvious answer, is stress and stress relief. It's not uncommon in the cultural zeitgeist to, you see the husband come home from a long day at work and he gets a drink. He's stressed, he's unwinding, he's kind of tuning the day out. And I think that is a really obvious answer with a career in the arts. We work in an industry with limited job security, and we're always fighting for that next paycheck and that next gig. That's a lot of stress on us, as sometimes we are balancing more than one job as well. The quote-unquote survival job that we were talking about in the first episode of this season. People from all industries that fall victim to substance abuse tend to start small and casually as a stress reliever, something to take the mind off the hecticness of their lives, and the same goes for performers who, as someone who lives it, lead a pretty hectic life. Next, I have to mention the loneliness of the industry. This is something when I was scripting this that I really wanted to lean into because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, something that I have been feeling a lot about, and I really just kind of wanted to mention the loneliness of being in the arts and entertainment industry. Not only are you running from job to job, auditions, classes, and the like, but if you book that show, that gig, whatever, you're in rehearsals all day and you're on stage until late hours of the night. That doesn't leave a lot of room to see friends or family, or if you have a partner, your partner, or to make connections outside of the show, outside of that world, outside of that industry. And even on the small scale of being in shows at my community or in my school, between class and work and rehearsals, especially when you get into fittings and tech and actual show week, like I am off the grid. I'm constantly in a state of leaving my apartment at 7 a.m. and coming back at midnight. You know, and as artists, we lead lives with such busy schedules and jobs that really ask for your life to revolve around it. And it can be lonely and isolating and confusing, and I think that that's when people start to turn to things to cope with that, to fill that void, whatever you want to call it. That loneliness is kind of where I think a lot of these coping mechanisms can slowly find a way to creep into our lifestyle. Alongside the isolating nature of the performer's schedule, depending on the people around you, you might feel isolated even more because the people around you don't understand your job, your passion, or your lifestyle. This is something I've talked about with parents, quote-unquote friends, a partner, whoever, but if the people in your circle are not supportive of the life you are leading, that can also lead to further isolation beyond just physically not being able to be at events, not being able to be at weddings or birthday parties or dinners out or anything. You know, not being able to physically be at those, but then having that emotional strain of being like, these people don't understand me, that can cause further loneliness, further isolation. And again, that's kind of where we start getting into those moments where we turn to other things to fill that in our heart, to fill that feeling. Another idea I had would be that alcohol specifically can be social. Drugs can be social as well, and as you've probably heard your whole life, a lot of working in this industry is who you know. Sometimes there are temptations to hang out with a certain crowd or try things you wouldn't usually do. And not to say that peer pressure like this is to be encouraged. We do not support peer pressure on the podcast. But sometimes as young and naive performers, new to the industry, you're unsure of your footing, you may at times be more susceptible to that peer pressure that might be coming in from different angles. Sean Daniels, the artistic director of the Arizona Theater Company and a recovered alcoholic, talks about the social aspect of alcohol and how it kickstarted his addiction. The following quote comes from his interview with Onstage Blog. He said, quote, "The story is about me being someone who felt like they really thrived, and alcohol helps my career, helps me to make connections." Daniels has gone on to write a play entitled The White Chip that's running off Broadway right now, which is a biographical story about his addiction and subsequent recovery. He goes on to say that it's joyful. It's the thing that we struggle with any addiction. At one point, it is joyful, and that ends up what you are chasing for some time afterward, end quote. Daniels did not only use alcohol as a social crutch, but also to write and perform. Another slippery slope in the world of substance abuse and the performing arts would be going on stage under the influence of something. Daniels would go on to say that having a drink at 5:30 p.m. became part of his process to loosen up and find aspects of his characters that he didn't think he could find otherwise. Quote, "An hour and a half before rehearsal, I would have a vodka tonic. By rehearsal time, there were no effects anyone could see, but I felt free, end quote. He continues to say that it's completely baked into the artist mindset that a level of self-destruction is necessary to unlock what you want to do. In some ways, you start to believe that without it, you are not an artist, that it helps you to unlock your genius. And I want to jump off script here for a minute and say that this is something that I really sort of wanted to lean into with last week's episode about the tortured artist archetype, and about how, you know, with the prevalence of the archetype coming up in media, it is kind of pushing that narrative that, you know, you kind of have to do the craziest things to get the best art, and that's what Sean is talking about here. You know, it's intrinsically in that mindset when you start creating that, what do I have to take out of myself to put into the art? And that's another thing that I think people are kind of falling into with, you know, alcohol, like Sean. I mean, we'll use alcohol for example because we're talking about Sean Daniels and his story. And I think the biggest thing is that there's such a lack of a conversation that, like, you don't have to do the dangerous thing. You don't have to do the risky thing. You don't have to do the thing that will destroy you to make good art. And that's just not a conversation. Not even in the mainstream is it a conversation. Like, it's, you know, you always hear, like, oh, celebrities are crazy. There's no conversation that told us we didn't have to be crazy. We've always had to be crazy to do what we thought and what the public thought was successful and quote-unquote good art. And I think only now are we starting to kind of come around to the idea that, like, you don't have to do the crazy thing. You don't need drugs and alcohol and a risky lifestyle. You don't, obviously, these things in moderation. Live your life. I'm not here to tell you how to live, but, you know, these things in moderation we're chilling. But, you know, you don't need to ruin it, to push it over to the extreme. You're creative and you're talented. And, like, genius is, in my eyes and in my heart, genius is an illusion. Genius, sort of like beauty, genius is in the eyes of the beholder. You know, people who have been historically labeled geniuses historically didn't see themselves that way. And there are people that the public don't view as genius, but they view themselves as. And I think that it is kind of in the eye of the beholder. And it really is something that you kind of have to reach out for and field what quote-unquote artistic genius is for yourself. And I urge the audience to understand that whatever you define genius as, it shouldn't be something that you're having to harm yourself to get to. I personally don't like being like, oh, that was a genius move on my behalf. You know, like, I don't ever see myself in the light of a genius or a visionary. That's just not me as an artist. But I even still kind of am like, do I need to, you know, there is that, he said, it's baked in. It's part of the mindset that you've always had. But as the conversation starts to shift, it could be better to not lean into that and realize that artistic success, artistic genius, it's what you want it to be and it's how you define it. And I urge you to reconsider if your idea of genius is you when you are severely under the influence, when you are putting yourself in harm's way. I urge you to reconsider what your definition of artistic genius is. Alright, I'm gonna hop back on script now. But like anything, addiction recovery is not linear. As seen in Daniel's play The White Chip and told in the same interview, quote, I got a lot of talking tos about pulling it together, Daniel said. I would say, I will. And I believed me, and they believed me, and then I couldn't do it. And I put that in here as a point to say that it's not linear. Addiction from anything, addiction from drugs, from alcohol, addiction to, I mean, you hear professionals, I mean, you hear anyone even talk about things like eating disorders, and it becomes an addictive thing. I've certainly felt that way. It becomes an addictive thing, and recovery is absolutely not linear, and there's always a time where you can start and you say, I'm gonna do it, and it's soul crushing and it's heartbreaking when you not only fail the people that are rooting for you, but you fail yourself. And it's so much easier said than done, but the getting back up and the turning it into something is what went on to make the story. You know, I don't have the direct quote, but in that interview, Sean Daniels said that writing The White Chip really helped him round that corner of relapse and recovery, and that vodka tonics are still friends, but they're friends that he doesn't talk to anymore. And, you know, he took that part of himself and he used his innate gift. He used himself sober. He used himself naturally to create a story that is not only helping him as a form of catharsis, but as a way to help and educate and teach the audiences that come see the play. I'm hopping back on script now. Recovery is not linear, and recovery from anything is not, nothing is linear, really. And I just kind of wanted to shout that out here. Moving on, so alcohol is not the only substance abused in the world of the performing arts. Most prevalently in the dance world where I come from, illicit drugs like cocaine, which can be used to keep energy high and the number on the scale down, are notoriously abused. Simone Mesmer, former soloist at American Ballet Theater and current soloist with the Miami City Ballet, tells of her trials and tribulations with cocaine usage in Dance magazine. Quote, Mesmer identifies her rock-bottom moment as the time, a year into her use, when she went on a binge that forced her to miss 2 days of rehearsal. By this time, ABT had more than a hunch about her problem and gave her an ultimatum: go to rehab or quit. The quote continues to say, dancers who are struggling are often seen as less favorable by their peers. We don't spend much energy on mental health in the dance world, and it's a way to weed out dancers. Only the strong survive. Only, like, I read that and I was like, gutted. It's so true. It's the ultimatum of go to rehab or quit, and I've been in those positions. Not as severe, but you know, you've been in those positions of like, pull your shit together, or you're not gonna do anything that you've been working for. You know, pull your shit together, or you're not on stage type beat, or things that I've kind of been faced with. And ultimatums like that can come from a good place. You know, I don't know who at ABT told her this, but you know, they probably did want to see her go get help. But also, not to be devil's advocate here, but also it's a bad look on the company if your dancers are going on cocaine binges and you don't do anything about it. It's a bad look, and being faced with such a strong ultimatum in such a vulnerable state, I get where the company is coming from, but I can only imagine how gutting that must have felt for Simone. I mean, you're doing something that you know is wrong, but you're seeing the benefit of it. You had been seeing she'd been using for a year, you know, she'd been seeing the benefit of it, and then obviously it hit that rock bottom, it hit that plummet, and it wasn't working anymore. And I can only imagine her feeling lost and scared, and I personally, reading the story, see that binge as a cry for help, and to have such a strong ultimatum thrown right in front of her by people that she respects, people that gave her her job. I know that it's from the right place, but that would have to be, it's from all the times that an ultimatum like that has been placed on me, it's been really damaging, and it's been really scary, and you both feel betrayed, and you feel scared, and you feel supported but simultaneously unsupported. And I think that there could have been, and I don't know if there were, she didn't talk about it in the interview, but from what I understand of the story, there were no conversations beforehand. Even when they were suspicious about her use, there were no conversations beforehand about, hey, let's try to get you some help, what's going on. And I think that lack of support, because they said that ABT had more than a hunch. I think they'd been seeing things, or people had been seeing things, and I think the biggest thing I'd have to say is early intervention is the best intervention. And I sound like a dare cop right now, and I promise you that I'm not trying to sound like a dare cop, but I really am. I do right now. But early intervention is the best intervention, and I think if someone at ABT had reached out and checked in on her, maybe she wouldn't have been put in such a scary position. Not that to say that her use, it was her using. Obviously, it's layered and it's nuanced, and addiction is not surface level thing, but like to be in that plummet and try to climb out, and you go back to work and they're like, go to rehab or quit, both options that are hard to fathom. It's like you lose your job, or you quit this thing that you thought was making you succeed at your job, and you're in the throes of addiction, and do I want to go through that? I know it's going to hurt my body more than I already have, and all this stuff. And I just, like, I was reading about that, and that ultimatum story just, like, totally gutted me. And to then go on with the quote, "Only the strong survive." It's true. And I touch on it later in the script, so I'll keep going before I ramble and say something stupid. But most famously and publicly, former Royal Ballet soloist Sergei Polunin was a user of cocaine both on and off stage. In an interview with Dazed magazine for his autobiographical documentary Dancer, Polunin is quoted as saying, "It blocks your brain from feeling pain. Nothing stops you, and you can really push yourself." I'm pausing, going off script again. I know I said I was going to script this episode, and I did, but there's, like, other things I kind of want to sprinkle in here. You have to, he was really villainized for his cocaine use. Obviously, drugs are not good. But to villainize people that are in the depths of addiction is only going to prevent them from getting the help they need sooner. And the sooner they get the help, the more benefits they can reap from that. And the villainization of Sergei at this time, I remember it being very prevalent in, like, The Guardian and the New York Times, and the tabloids. He was the bad boy of ballet, and they talk about it in the documentary. And he's gone on to do some things that he's probably not proud of. He's gone on to do some things that I don't necessarily stand by. But the villainization of his drug use was really extreme, and I think that's why he didn't get clean and didn't get help sooner. And you have to realize about his career, that with his career, he had so many outside pressures that were becoming internal pressures. He was the best. He was very naturally talented, but he also thought that if he was the best, it would bring his entire family back together. And putting that kind of pressure on yourself, whether it's realistic or unrealistic, that it does amp up the ambition to succeed, but it also lowers the judgment, I would say. It lowers the judgment. It's, you don't, you know, it's very all or nothing, it takes to succeed type energy there. And I think that's why he really did fall into drugs. You know, he was working so hard, and he was also trying to balance the turmoil he felt with his family, and he was both feeling really lost and alone, but also really celebrated in the world of ballet. And that's so dichotomous and messy and sticky and gross. And, you know, he did say, like, it blocks your brain from feeling pain. And if you know anything about ballet, it is not graceful all the time. It is not elegant. It is, the whole gig is that it looks easy when it's not. Ballet is painful, and when you're training, and you're at the top of your game, like Sergei was, and you're performing in everything, and you're rehearsing everything, and you're dancing 20 some odd hours a day, you know, that's a lot of pain that your body feels. And I can see why he was tempted and continued and fell into that spiral. And nothing stops you. You can really push yourself. And I think at the time, he was looking to push forward, to keep working at it. He thought it was going to save his life. And it ended up wrecking his career. I'll go on and keep on my script here. However, Sergei continues, now on the other side of substance abuse, and strongly doesn't recommend it to other dancers. From the same magazine interview, he says, quote, "It's good in the moment, I have to say. If you can lift 200, then do cocaine. It's fine. But unfortunately, it breaks up families, and it breaks up you. You get depressed. Months later, you don't have that energy at all. It's fake energy." And that was like a really raw thing reading, you know. It's good in the moment, I have to say. And that's similar to what Simone and what Sean Daniels said about drugs and alcohol. In the moment, you think it's helping, and in the moment, it's beneficial. This even goes on when you fall into, you know, you get in the topic of disordered eating behaviors. It feels good in the moment. And in the moment, you don't, when you're in the throes of something like that, you don't see the long game. You don't see the ultimatum coming until it's right in front of you. You don't see the go to rehab or you're fired until it's being said to you. You know, and it's good in the moment, but it breaks you up. And it breaks up families, and you get depressed, and it just expedites the issues that you were trying to mask anyways. And in the long game, addiction to anything will make you a bad performer. A worse performer, a less happy performer, a less authentic performer. And it's really heartbreaking because you start thinking it's going to benefit your career, and you end worse than when you started. And you're sick, and you're tired, and like Sergei said, you're depressed, and you don't have any energy, and you can't get yourself to class or rehearsal or a scene study or a table read. And it's just like gutting, because I see, I'll talk about my sobriety towards the end of the episode, but it's the, you know, you think you know it's wrong, but there's a part of your brain that overrides that, saying like, but it's gonna help you. And you don't see the long game until it's too late. And there's just, yeah. So substance abuse in the arts halts, hinders, and ruins careers that are already finite and fickle. In my opinion, the way that we circumvent such abuse is education. As mentioned earlier with Simone Messner's interview, mental health resources in the world of professional performance are few and far between, and there is still a stigma and negativity surrounding the artists that do seek out and utilize those resources. Once again, to quote, "Only the strong survive. But what if the strength is a facade?" Implementing substance abuse and addiction education into BFA programs and professional arts companies around the world would be beneficial in lessening the amount of abuse in the industry. This is kind of my pitch. This is my way to help enter type B. Education on the long-term effects on health and career would help struggling artists see past the immediate benefits of substance abuse. And like Sergey said, it's good in the moment, but detrimental long-term. And I think having that immediate education will help them kind of be able to picture the long-term. Because you don't ever think that you're gonna be one of those people until you are. You know, you don't... Oh, this episode is going all over the place. You don't start cutting back meals thinking you're gonna end up one of the anorexic, traditional, stereotypical ballerinas that you see on the news. You know, you don't start... You know, Sean Daniels didn't start excessively drinking thinking that he was going to be one of the tortured alcoholic playwrights. You know, Simone Mesmer didn't do her first line of cocaine at 19 thinking she was going to be sat in the office of American Ballet Theater being told go to rehab or you're not dancing here anymore. You know, you don't think it's you until it's too late. And I think that education of the long-term benefits, not just the sensationalized stories that we've heard. I mean, we've all heard the Gelsey Kirkland story. We all saw the Sergey backlash when he was still actively dancing and actively using. And that villainization and sensationalization of these stories, it starts to seem so outlandish, and you could never... How could I ever I would never let myself get that bad. This is just casual. This is a one-time thing. I would never let myself get that bad. And you don't let yourself get that bad until you're there, and you don't even know that you're there until you're the next story. You know, and I think that having education in these college programs, when we start blossoming into our careers, when we start wanting to network, when we're offered different things that we don't know, it's all new to us, and having this long-term education would be very beneficial and help us kind of picture the long term and desensationalize the stories we've heard. Because the Gelsey Kirklands of the world started the same way that the Sean Daniels of the world started. It was for the benefit of their career. It was casual. They can stop whenever they want, and then very quickly they can't. This education could also speak on the signs that someone is abusing drugs or alcohol, things to look for in our peers, and ways that we can talk to them about it and get them the help that they deserve. Like I said at the top of the episode, recovery from any addiction is possible, and I did mention this with Simone earlier. That early intervention, even just being like, hey, I just want to make sure you're okay. I mean, there's always the chance that, you know, and I mean, not to play, like, devil's advocate here, but there's always the chance that they're going to lie, be like, oh, yeah, nothing's going on, I'm fine. You know, but there is the chance that if you spark up that conversation, they will be... If this conversation comes from a loving and caring and not accusatory standpoint, there is the chance that, you know, they could open up and they could get help earlier and what they deserve earlier. And I think that early education, especially in college BFA programs, when we're starting to enter this world, is really important. So I thought that I would close with discussing my own outlook on sobriety and my choice to lead a completely sober lifestyle. I did script this. I might be kind of adding in off-the-cuff thoughts here and there. But mainly my decision for a sober lifestyle is that I don't like the taste of alcohol. As, like, narc as that sounds, I don't like it. I think it tastes, like, cleaner. Like something, you know, I like, people are like, oh, you'll get past it. I've never been able to get past it, and I don't like the smell of smoke, cigarettes, cigars, weed, whatever. I'm not into the smell of smoke. Not into it. It's like the immediate sense, like the sense perception of it all, I can never get past to the point where, like, I'll be able to enjoy it. Yeah, and not to mention, my lungs are already not as developed and as strong as a quote-unquote normal person's are. I was born very prematurely, so I know what I'm working with, and I don't want to put myself at more of a risk than I already am, but also not enjoying the sense of it all, the taste, the feeling. The risks of me starting outweigh not even the risks, but the risks and the dislikes outweigh any possible reward of getting drunk, getting high. For me personally, this is just how I choose to live, and especially on substance and alcohol, excessive use and abuse. Obviously, get a drink with the friends, you're gonna wake up fine, but when it gets excessive, when it gets dangerous, when it gets blackout, I obviously come from a college setting, there's a lot of drinking, but on the topic of excessive drinking or even medium drug use, I like to say that if a professional violin player breaks his violin, he can buy a new one. A dancer or actress cannot buy a new body. And that's kind of, when people ask me why I'm sober, I kind of bring that up. I've worked very hard to get my body to a place where I feel strong and confident dancing, and I, in my right mind, don't see drugs or alcohol benefiting me in a way that outweighs, like I said, the risks. Secondly, a major factor in my decision to be sober comes from the fact that I know that I have an addictive personality. And I don't know if that's somewhere in my genetics, but if I like something, I love something. And for a really tame example, I've had the same cup of coffee with the same creamer in it every day for 2 years. If you know me in real life, I am a relentless, even if you know me on the podcast, I am a relentless fan of Dr. Pepper. I rewatch TV shows and movies nearly exclusively. It's very rare that especially with TV shows, it's very rare that I start something new, but I'll even reread entire books that I love. And on a less tame example, I see my addictive personality manifest in my art. And like I mentioned in last week's episode, if I'm working on something, if it's my work, if it's someone else's, if it's a show, if it's a dance, if it's a play, musical, whatever, I am pedal to the fucking metal. I am laying on the gas. I am laying on the horn. I am stepping on it. I'm talking horse racing blinders on, one track mind, you're not stopping me, both to my benefit and to my detriment. I'm a work-centric person. My ambition drives me. Everyone kind of knows that, like I talked about in last week's episode. It is something that I know kind of radiates off of me. And I find myself addicted to feeling productive and feeling successful and accomplished and working. And it's knowing this about me, there is that fear in the back of my head that's if I did find an alcohol I like, or if I did find a drug that I liked, I think that it would be too easy for me to slip down the rabbit hole, and it very rapidly becomes a problem. And that could just be, we're going off the cuff here, that could just be me, looking out for myself. Maybe I'm being too cautious. Maybe I'm underestimating my willpower here, but I do have this innate sense that if I found something I really liked, it would become a problem rapidly. And I'm open, but I do fear that if I ever found something that I really enjoyed, like a drink or a drug of choice, it would very quickly not become a casual thing, because I am very much not a casual person. I don't do anything really casually. If I do something, there is an end goal. I'm working on getting better at doing things casually, but right now and in this conversation, I am not doing things casually. So lastly, I want to leave on the thought of applause. And it might seem random, but like, stick with me here. I was scripting this episode out, and I was like, this is a thought that's been in the back of my head writing this entire episode, and I kind of just want to draw this comparison. And it might be stupid, and it might be dramatic, and it might be whatever, but I just kind of want to draw this comparison that's kind of been floating in my mind. As performers, we chase applause, outside validation, and whether we like it or not about ourselves, the feeling of that applause is one of the best things. I mean, as vain and gross as it sounds, ask any performer, and the feeling of applause at curtain call is rewarding. And someone has seen your work, and they don't even know the half of the work that went into the show, but they're standing for you, and it's a feeling that you cannot replicate, and it's one of the best feelings, and it makes me feel sick to my stomach and arrogant to even talk about that, but it is a really good feeling. It's a really good feeling. It's my favorite feeling. It is my favorite feeling, being on stage, and there's the lights, and there's an audience, and it feels so alive and electric, and it is one of my favorite feelings. And I think a lot of performers, if not the majority of performers, can relate to that. And as relating to that, it is one of the best things. I think we try to keep that joy and that adrenaline pumping for as long as possible. And that's where you get into the stimulants and the parties and the love and the sex and the work and the ambition and the high-risk behaviors, and I'm going off script, but I think it's when there's so many gaps between jobs, when there's gaps between gigs, when you're feeling insecure about your job, you know, when you're running between gigs and nothing's working out, and, you know, you're auditioning for everything and nothing is working out, and you're feeling stuck and you're feeling sad, and you do things to replicate the feeling that is irreplicable. This is why I don't go off script. You do things to replicate the feeling that is impossible to replicate, and that's why I think that sometimes we're tempted to go do these things. Will it feel like being on stage that I miss? Will it feel like an audience? Will it feel like a successful artistic endeavor? Because that's my life, that's my heart, that's my soul, and it begs the question, are we addicted to applause? I simply read that like a slam poet, but it begs the question, are we addicted to applause? And, you know, we search for that feeling in other things, in other ways, in other people, but we know that nothing can compare to it, and is that the greatest addiction of all? And that's kind of a thought that was floating around my head, sort of kind of like at the top of the episode when I was speculating reasons why I could realistically see people falling into substance abuse in the arts. I think that chasing that adrenaline high that we love and crave and adore is maybe a part of it, and maybe we go searching for it in places that we maybe shouldn't. And before I leave, I just want to say thank you for sticking around for this heavier episode. I'm genuinely really proud of it and the work that I put into researching and scripting this. As always, leave your thoughts below, and I will leave all of the research in the show notes. You can follow the journey at BFA Baby Podcast and at Tata's Ballet on Instagram. Thank you for listening. As always, merit and a kiss. Mwah.